Well, joining us in studio is the NEHAWU spokesperson, Mr. Khaya Xaba. We also have the SA General Secretary of Mr. Janice George, actually the FEDUSA General Secretary. We have Professor Sipho Siabe, political analyst, and on the phone line we'll be joined by Mr. Sizwe Pamla, the COSATU spokesperson. A very good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening.
Let me start off with you, Prof. This 30,000 public servants that are due to be out of jobs in the next 3 years. Your comments?
Well, I mean, first of all, if that was true, it would be a negation of what the workers have been complaining about. Because what we have right now, we have high and unsustainable unemployment. And the ANC has always said the first objective is to make sure that there is job creation to address that. But I hear that the government is retreating or actually stating that that statement is untrue. But what is obvious and would be to the workers that if you have 30,000 that can be retrenched through other forms, there's always a language that will always be used, right sizing, rationalization, restructuring. But when you start putting a human face to it, you know that it means job losses. So I don't think this government at this point in time can risk doing that, especially when you have looming elections. Maybe after that there might be an attempt. But what I know is that this is not something that the unions are going to take lying down. Actually, they are going to be raising those issues. But all this notion of restructuring, people must actually look at it carefully. We've seen it happen during the Mbeki years. We've seen it happen through in higher education, and we have not seen dividends that came out of that. But having said that, we should not shy away from saying that the system as it stands or the public service is not efficient. So we do need to start looking at how to make it efficient and beyond, before we start with making cutting people out. We need to start looking at performance management so that there's also what people call consequent management, that where people fail the public or the state, those people should then be driven out. But to simply jump to cutting without bringing systems of accountability, without bringing systems of performance, it will be jumping the gun.
What's FEDUSA's stake on this?
Yeah, look, 2 points that I just wanted to mention, and I think the professor have also confirmed it, that the speculation around that has been found to be untrue. That there's 30,000 people, jobs that's going to be retrenched, that's number one. And before I came onto the show, I also found a couple of people that attended the cabinet Lokotla and that I also spoke to some senior ministers. So that is something that is at least something, you know, that has been confirmed. And I think government is going to release a statement tonight, late still. The second issue is the issue, and that is where the public servant unions have raised serious concerns with government to say, look, the workers in the public sector are pulling a heavy load because we find there's many vacancies amongst nurses, there's many vacancies in teaching, there's many vacancies in the police sector. And that's the reason why service delivery are being seriously affected, you know, in national government and provincial government. And what we have been repeatedly saying to government, that we have at the top, where we have a really bloated section, where we have many government departments that is not needed. And government did indicate that they want to introduce a scientific approach where they can reduce the number of cabinet ministers, because that is where the wastage is. What we need is for our people to get a good service from government in terms of quality education, in terms of quality healthcare, in terms of making our people safe in our houses and police people. So those frontline people are needed, and that is where the vacancies are. And these top vacancies, positions that is filled by people that in our view is only many departments that is absolutely not needed. That around that issue, government need to sit around the table with labor in the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council and make sure that we make the public service better, but we also don't allow any retrenchments from taking place.
And Mr. Xaba, how do you think that government should actually be looking to reduce their 20 million rand salary bill? Should a job cut, like a major job cut, like the one that we've been hearing about, is that the best way to go about it?
Well, first, let me confirm that the Department of Public Service Administration has actually released a statement just about 7 p.m. saying that, yes, there are plans to restructure the public service, but they didn't say the 30,000 is inflated. Actually, not that much, but it doesn't go on to say what is the number that they would look to lay off in order to assist in the process of cutting costs. But going back to your question, as how we did one in February 2018 during the State of the Nation address, the President did make pronouncements in that regard to say that the public service would have to be cut down.
Yes.
But we believe that this is because of austerity measures, because government doesn't really have enough money to sustain the wage bill. And that is because our government has allowed for some time people to loot the government, to loot government's money by greedy politicians and managers who are at the helm of the state. And thus now they don't have money to fund these jobs. But as Neha was saying, we're willing to fight fire with fire. If this plan does go ahead, we'll run the government ungovernable, because we believe that these jobs, these people need, because some of them you find that one person is supporting 8 other people, so it will affect a lot of people. But you can't do that to the public service, as Comrade George has mentioned, that you find that in one hospital, a nurse would also be a porter, would also be an administrator as well. So currently the public service is very understaffed. So if you were to lay off 30,000 people, it would mean that the end of service delivery, nothing will take place. The reason currently you find that provincial Department of Health in dismay is the fact that there's not enough workforce in order to ensure that there's quality public service. So it's important then that these plans would have to be addressed with us, with Labour and all relevant stakeholders, so that we find a suitable way forward, which does not include putting a dent on service delivery already struggling as it is now.
Well, fortunately, we do actually have the spokesperson of the Public Service and Administration, Marva Scott, on the phone line. A very good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, first of all, can you confirm for us what the exact figure of the layoffs is? We've been hearing that the figure of 30,000 is inflated. Can you just clarify that information for us?
Good evening, and thank you for having us on your show. First of all, I would like to make it very clear and categorically that there is no plan whatsoever to lay off 30,000 jobs as reported in the Mail and Guardian. We are actually very much surprised on the report, because we don't know where these figures are coming from. They are claiming that there was a presentation or information came from the Cabinet Lekgotla. And from the information that we have, I am actually aware that the Minister for Public Service and Administration did make a presentation at the Lekgotla. That presentation was looking at the state of the public service, including the whole issue of the macro-organization of the state. None of the issues or numbers reported in the Mail and Guardian this morning was on the presentation by the Minister, and I'm not aware of anybody else who's crunched numbers, in the context of the macro-organization of the state. So we reject this report with the contempt it deserves, and we believe that it is creating panic, not only in the public service, but in the whole country. And we can understand the reaction by the labor unions, because if government is to undertake an initiative of this nature, which will impact on the livelihoods of people, surely through the bargaining council, it will have to engage labor. And labor has not been engaged on this. So there is no such a thing as 30,000 jobs being on the line.
And government has also said that it's going to be working towards professionalizing the civil service. Do you think that that's a welcome plan?
Of course, it's a welcome plan. Professionalizing the public service is in the plans of government, and I mean the minister is on record both in his in her budget vote speech, saying that we have to ensure that in the macro organization of the state, we do it in such a way that it delivers an outcome of a government that is effectively enabled to deliver services to the people. We've just launched, by the way, a graduate recruitment program, which is focusing on recruiting graduates, the youth, into the public service, all in a bid to turn around the image of government and its competitiveness. So yes, the plans to professionalize, the plans to reconfigure, all of these will contribute to the achievement of the goals of the National Development Plan in the Vision 2030.
And just lastly, the civil service has been said to be bloated. Even President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned that government departments should be reduced drastically. How do you think that this can be done in order to save money but still be able to deliver services to the people of the country effectively?
The debate about the bloated public service is a complex one. All of us know, for instance, that there are gaps and challenges in terms of the technical and professional skills in the public service. There are critical areas and sectors that require these specialized skills, and the public service is lacking, and this has an impact on service delivery of government. So instead of talking about a bloated public service, what we should be talking about perhaps is how do we reskill? How do we retrain the people that are currently in the system so that we plug the gaps and the challenges that have been identified in terms of the professional skills? For instance, I can give you an example. One of the sectors that government has identified as a critical sector for economic growth is the fishing economy. And how many marine scientists do we have in the public service? So all I'm saying is that instead of bemoaning what we call the bloated public service, we should be focusing on initiatives and programs to reskill and retrain people so that they plug those gaps and challenges of technical and professional skills that are much needed in the public service.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Scott, for joining the conversation this evening. We move now to Mr. Sizwe Pamla, the COSATU spokesperson. A very good evening to you, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Well, what's COSATU's stance on this matter?
No, look, as COSATU, we are comforted by the statements from the DPSA confirming that these are just rumors and speculation. But look, our position is clear. We are not going to allow a situation where there's talk of retrenchment in the public service. And I'm also happy to hear the spokesperson of the DPSA trying to clarify this myth that has been repeated time and again that the public service is bloated. That thing is not true. In fact, if you go back to 1994, when the apartheid state incorporated the TPPC states, the workforce at the time was 1.4 million public servants in this country. And of course, in 1996, when GIA was introduced and outsourcing started to take place, it was reduced to 960,000. After 2009, when President Jacob Zuma started to recruit again and allow recruitment in the public service, we are now sitting at 1.3 million. Now, what it tells you is that in 94, we had 1.4 million public servants servicing a population of 40.1 million. 24 years later, we have 1.3 million public service servicing a population of 52 million. So it's the population that has grown, but the public service has remained static. So it's a myth that people like to repeat time and again. So we need to put to bed this issue of the bloated public service. And then we can have a conversation about the reskilling of the public service. We can have a conversation about how do we improve the efficiency. Because we ourselves, there are numerous campaigns that have been driven by our unions talking about how do we improve the efficiency of the state. We're on board with that. But what we're not going to allow is a situation where the policy failures of the last 24 years are going to be blamed on the workers. Because you have 17 million people on welfare. We have 37% unemployment. We have 60% of your workforce still dependent on government, the so-called working poor. So what are you going to do with all of these people? Because They are looking at government for their housing. They are looking at government for their health, for their education, for everything. So if you talk about retrenching, it means you're abandoning those people. So we are happy to hear that government has come out to clarify this issue. We're comfortable with that. But going forward, we think we need to have a conversation really so that we can stop talking over each other. Let's have a conversation. There's PSCPC. If there's anything to table, let's go to the PSCPC and have another conversation about how do we change or turn around the public sector.
Well, let's get another voice in on the conversation. Professor Chris Malikane, who is an economist. A very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us. What's your take on the size of the civil or public service sector? Is it big enough? Is it not keeping up with the growth of the population? Should it be downsized to save costs? What do you think? Well, it seems we lost Professor Malikane. We'll try to get back in touch with him. I'll just come back to studio. Professor, what's your take on the size of the population versus the size of the public sector? Because, I mean, COSATU makes a very strong argument there.
Yeah, I think what's important for government that leads is that it needs to come up front. It should not react to statements and speculations that come from other people. But when you work nicodemously, you allow some members of a government to continue to make statements to some of the newspapers. What we see here is an attempt to troubleshoot, to try to create a new narrative, bloated public service, inefficient and all that, which some of which is actually true. But what has emerged from the public service and administration spokesperson is very clear, because what they do is to contest the idea of bloatedness. And what you also find from COSATU is also clarification of the weaknesses that exist. And I like the notion that he has also put that if you look at the numbers that are there in the public service, and you look at the population growth, you can actually see that there's Dennis was also pointing out that what you have is people who are carrying a heavy load. Mm-hmm. But what is agreed upon by the unions as well as government is that the public service must be more efficient. And what it means that the people who add little value need to be exited from the system. But what is important is that we hold the view that the public service is a service that is an instrument that is there to serve the people. And at the moment, because of these heavy loads, we've seen inability to deliver. You see a number of protests. So if you are to try to cut that down, then you are actually asking for far greater challenges. Mm-hmm. So for the workers in this country, they must know that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And that means vigilance to the very same government, because what you have here is a form of doublespeak.
Well, Mr. George, just in 2 minutes, your closing comments on this topic.
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, the democratic constitutional state has a fundamental responsibility. And that social accord is very tangible because it's being supervised by the courts also. You know, where our citizens go to the courts and complain about service delivery that's not being rendered to them in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of police. And that's the reason why for DUSA I've always maintained, together with our colleagues from COSATU and from NACTU, that the government must sit down with our public sector unions in the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council. Mm-hmm. And in that bargaining council, we must need to look at a number of things. How do we professionalize our public service? How do we modernize service delivery? And number 3, how are we transparent about what's happening because in the public service? Because many of our members and our colleague from Nehawu have confirmed that our nurses are cleaners, they are administrators, and they must also look after our patients. And in many times, the service in terms of the medicine that our people are supposed to receive. And these are old people that sit in the mornings till the afternoons just to get the service. And that frontline service has to be professional, and it has to be modernized for our people.
Very true. Mr. Xaba, your closing statements.
Well, we'd like to share the sentiments of our federation that were comforted by the explanation given by DPSA. But moreover, we would also want to have a conversation whereby we don't speak above each other so that we take each other into confidence so that we don't have situations whereby there's panic created by newspaper reports. But over and above that, we still think that we still need to have a conversation in relation to the filling of vacant funded posts in the public service, the end of outsourcing, because I think those two are also adding to the current problems. So if government can fill the vacant posts, then we can equally address the issue of service delivery. But also with the issue of outsourcing, we've noted that outsourcing inherently breeds corruption, the issue of abuse of workers by those people who are running public service providers. So I think we must deal with those issues. If we can deal with that, I think we'll be halfway there. But one last time, if government really is planning to cut these jobs, we're willing to fight fire with fire. They'll meet us on the streets.
Thank you very much to my guests in studio and the guests that joined us over the phone line. It is time now for a short break, but remember that the conversation does continue online, so follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @AfroWorldview.